you very much, Mr. Bashman. Without further ado, I'd like to begin the public symposium. As introduced by Professor Jagannath Panda, we are very lucky to have these 5 panelists, Professors HARUN, GAENS, BATONGBACAL, and Radowski, and PEDROZO. So I'd like to give, as time is very much limited, I'd like to give each of the panelists maximum 10 minutes for the initial remarks. And as there are 6 panelists, including myself, in total, I'd like to be very strict in timekeeping. So I'd like to ask for your cooperation. So, you know, the panelists may want to make their own initial remarks in accordance with the order listed in today's agenda. So, first, Professor BATONGBACAL of the Philippines, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Kuchisan, and thank you to the RIPS and the University of Warsaw for inviting me here. This is also my first time here in Poland and in Warsaw. I only wish the weather cooperated. Now, to begin, let me just say that last year, 2024, witnessed the greatest increase in tensions so far in East Asia, and all of them fueled by the same thing, which is China's maritime expansion. There are 3 sea areas to be concerned about right now. The first is the South China Sea, then you have the Taiwan Straits, and then the East China Sea. These are connected sea areas, as you can imagine, if you just look at the map. In the South China Sea side, tensions have been largely between the Philippines and China because of China's decision, basically, since last year, to be more aggressive and to actually begin using force against the Philippines, to employ full-blown coercion, to force the Philippines to back off from its own exclusive economic zone in continental shelf. The tensions have centered around Second Thomas Shoal, which is a reef that is part of the Philippines' EEZ continental shelf according to the South China Sea Arbitration Award back in 2016. This area has been the subject actually of a use of force by China last 17 June 2024, when Chinese Coast Guard and militia forces, basically fishermen, used axes and knives and spears against two teams of the Philippine Navy that was undertaking a resupply of a Philippine vessel on Second Thomas Shoal. This resulted in injuries to the Philippine Navy crew who were under orders not to fight back in order to prevent any escalation, as well as the destruction of the 2 boats that they were rubber boats, rigid hull rubber boats that they were using to conduct the resupply. At Scarborough Shoal, which is another reef, this one east of Luzon, which is closer to Manila, about 124 nautical miles away from Manila. We also see an increase of tensions because China has used its Coast Guard vessels to actively interfere with the operations of the Philippine Coast Guard and other fisheries patrol vessels that were trying to also provide support to Philippine fishermen in these areas. In both cases, the China Coast Guard used water cannon against Philippine vessels, as well as rammed some of these vessels. Although they say that water cannon is not equivalent to bullets and guns, the thing is these water cannons are strong enough to bend steel. And definitely ramming is not a friendly gesture. These are all taking place, they were all taking place in the run-up to the incident of the use of force, as I mentioned. And afterwards, because of that use of force, the 2 countries had to come to an agreement to try to dial down the tensions, at least on Second Thomas Shoal. However, China decided to continue increasing tensions with respect to Scarborough Shoal and the new area, a place that we call Sabina Shoal in the international charts. Sabina Shoal is even closer to the Philippines than Second Thomas Shoal. All in all, right now what is happening is that China is deploying its military and paramilitary forces, which include the Coast Guard and militia vessels, to essentially occupy, quote-unquote, the South China Sea all the way up to the limits of its 9-dash line. that leaves Manila, that leaves the Philippines with only waters that at some points are only 22 nautical miles away from its coast, the southern portion, and about 80 nautical miles away in the northern portion. This is in a way being enforced by China by constantly interfering with Philippine fishing operations. Our fishermen now are unable to fish in these areas because they are immediately accosted by China Coast Guard and militia vessels, and they are basically scared. And we have, our fishermen have been complaining, especially the last 2 years, of being unable to catch enough to even recover their costs in their fishing operations. They've also been actively seeking out basically any Philippine Coast Guard or Bureau of Fisheries vessel that attempts to venture beyond the 9-dash line. And all of this, they're blaming the Philippines for causing trouble. Imagine China Coast Guard and other vessels traveling anywhere from 800 to 1,000 nautical miles away from the coast to come within 80 to 100 nautical miles of the Philippines, and they say that we're the ones causing trouble. Now, this pressure is intended essentially to enforce their claim, despite the South China Sea Arbitration Award. And it's not really limited to the Philippines. At this point, they're also increasing pressure against Indonesia and Malaysia, trying to dissuade them from conducting petroleum exploration in their respective continental shelves. The Philippines, incidentally, has been unable to conduct petroleum exploration for the past 15 years now because of Chinese pressure and interference against even just exploration activities. Now, especially in the past year, we've also noticed an increase in information and cognitive warfare operations to support China's maritime expansion. Essentially trying to convince the people of the world, for one thing, that the Philippines is the troublemaker, essentially trying to isolate the Philippines from the rest of Southeast Asia, and to portray the Philippines as being nothing more than a puppet of the United States and acting only at its behest. Conveniently ignoring the fact that the Philippines is a sovereign nation with its own interests in its natural resources and its inclusive economic zone and continental shelf. China is essentially preventing the Philippines from achieving a certain degree of food security because it is preventing the Philippine fishermen from continuing their fishing activities, and also preventing us from achieving energy security because of the inability to tap energy resources in that part of, in the continental shelf. So that is the current picture for us in the South China Sea. Activities as well are also happening on the Vietnamese side, Malaysian, Indonesian side, but I will defer to our colleagues on that. On the Taiwan Straits, as you know, if you've been reading the papers, we've seen that China has increased its military activities around Taiwan, conducting provocative activities such as conducting live-fire missile exercises and maneuvers of its Navy and Air Force. And it has also been intensifying its coercive rhetoric against everyone else to not interfere, to not even talk or react to these activities. And on the other side, on the East China Sea, of course, you also have the increased presence and activities around the Singapore, but also in places like the Miyako Straits. So all of these three sea areas are coming under increasing Chinese dominance, essentially. And this is the real cause of tensions in that area. There are other non-traditional security threats, such as maritime piracy, terrorism, IUU fishing, and of course climate change. But these are being addressed so far by bilateral and trilateral cooperation between the countries. Especially with respect to maritime piracy and terrorism, it has been seen to be very effective. And as well, IUU fishing and climate change are also sought to be addressed through other international instruments. Now, climate change, however, is not being addressed through bilateral cooperation, which is quite interesting. The countries prefer to really use the global international framework of climate change talks in order to address climate mitigation and adaptation. And with respect to IUU fishing, the problem there is that it remains to be unaddressed on account of the territorial and maritime disputes on the South China Sea side, where the most fishing activity takes place, and also because of concerns on possible interference with their neighbors within Southeast Asia with respect to other places. Okay, now, That is the picture as of 2024. Now, despite all of this, East Asia and also in Southeast Asia, we've actually had a very long and fruitful history of maritime security cooperation since the 1990s, with the end of the Cold War, and the realization within ASEAN that we are after all linked as a group through our maritime highways. So ASEAN actually remains a central magnet and principal node for many kinds of maritime security cooperation activities and projects, both between countries as well as between ASEAN and nearby external powers like Australia, Japan, and India, and also beyond that, such as between ASEAN and the EU. However, the principal challenge, which is China's maritime expansion, remains to be inadequately addressed. So the results would be said to be rather mixed. An in-house solution to the challenge of China remains elusive because, frankly speaking, many are intimidated by China because of various reasons, such as economic linkages and influence. And the ASEAN-China negotiations for the conduct of the South China Sea, which has been the principal stage at which ASEAN and China have been trying to portray the situation in the South China Sea, they continue to drag on. And it's not likely, despite the statements to the contrary, it doesn't really appear that these negotiations will bear much fruit in the coming years. Now, the problem there, of course, is that despite the ongoing negotiations, China's deployments, assertiveness, and even outright interference in the activities of the ASEAN claimants in the area, they continue despite the existence of the stocks. And naturally, that leads to a serious trust deficit and confidence deficit in these discussions. Okay. Now, of course, the connection between East Asia and Europe is quite clear. Aside from the geopolitical interests, principally maintaining the rules-based international order and international law, and its economic interests, EU being the third largest trading partner of ASEAN, there has been quite a lot of effort to engage in cooperation. Many efforts such as in increasing maritime domain awareness, providing assistance with respect to climate change, etc. These have all been taking place. And however, there is still a need, we think, to continue along this track. For example, to enhance dialogue and exchange of best practices. With the Philippines, for example, we've had a notable increase in interactions between the Philippines and various EU members, such as Germany, France, the Netherlands, Denmark, and some other countries, even Estonia, I think, and the Czech Republic. So enhancing this dialogue is very important, especially when it comes to defending the rules-based order and international law. When it comes to new areas for cooperation, it appears that cybersecurity cooperation, information sharing, capacity building is something that can be opened up, because cyber is a major vulnerability for the Philippines and the rest of Southeast Asia. And this is not just on the software side, the use of various software, but also now it must also turn towards infrastructure such as submarine cables and even satellite communications, because we've seen that these are requiring such efforts. And there will be other areas that we can talk about later on, and probably can stop there. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Chi-sensei. I was asked to give a Finnish perspective on the topic of maritime security in East Asia, so I hope to be able to contribute a bit to the comparative angle. Now, there used to be an old joke saying that Finland and Japan are actually really close together because they are separated by only one country. But it's undeniable, I think, that as of February 2022, as of the start of Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine, that has brought Finland and Japan, and by definition also Asia and Europe, much closer together. So I think there's now much more of an awareness of the importance of Asia for Europe's prosperity. Think of critical sea lanes, as well as in terms of security. So the war in Europe, in Ukraine, certainly also has implications for Asia. And I think maritime security is also one of those areas where there should be more of a conversation going. First, a couple of points. So why is the maritime dimension important for Finland? Well, first of all, an obvious factor is simple geography. And most of the attention, of course, goes to the 1,340 kilometer long land border that Finland shares with Russia. But of course the Baltic Sea is equally important as a vital route for Finland's exports and imports. Is about 90% of those that go via the sea. And also in terms of security, that the Baltic Sea is the longer the more becoming the operating theater for Russia's so-called shadow fleet. So basically very old oil tankers going around under a different flag in attempt to circumvent the sanctions placed on Russia. So to ensure the freedom of navigation and the safety of the Baltic Sea is certainly a factor why the maritime dimension is important for Finland. A second factor is the NATO membership. You all are aware that Finland joined NATO in April 2023. I've been living in Finland myself for about 20 years, and I can tell you the change has been really abrupt and overnight. From a very ambiguous Finlandization stance towards Russia to an overnight change towards siding with the West and joining NATO. This also has implications for the maritime dimension, because the Baltic Sea now is sometimes referred to as a NATO lake. This is of course not entirely true, because Russia still has access through St. Petersburg as well as Kaliningrad. And certainly the Baltic Sea might be more safe now, but there's also new security challenges that have been raised as a result. And that's my third factor why the Baltic Sea is important for Finland. That is because of the recent increase in hybrid warfare at sea and attacks on critical infrastructure. And this infrastructure is of course important because 2/3 of oil and gas is transported by sea, and 99% of the global data flows are transmitted through undersea cables. And the Baltic Sea especially is vulnerable because, for example, between Estonia and Finland there's only 75 kilometers or something, with several pipelines and undersea cables running through the seabed. So there's major risk of disruption, and I think you've all been reading about the recent events. In October 2023, there was a Chinese ship that caused disruption on a gas pipeline linking Finland and Estonia. 18 November 2024, there was damage to a communication cable between Finland and Germany, the Sea Lion 1, also caused by a Chinese ship. And then most recently, just 3 weeks ago on Christmas Day, 25 December 2024, there was damage to a subsea cable caused by a tanker called the Eagle S that was registered on the Cook Islands, but basically run by a company based in the UAE, that caused major damage to the subsea cable. And this was the first time that Finland actually intervened and detained the oil tanker, and investigations are still ongoing as we speak. So this is a very new area in terms of policy responses, of security risks, and certainly also a new area for academic study. So then, what does this all have to do with East Asia? What is the relevance of the Finnish case for East Asia? Are there perhaps lessons to be drawn? I would briefly like to point out 5. The first one is that, well, very basically, the fact that the activity of Chinese vessels in the Baltic Sea raises, of course, concerns about the Russia-China strategic partnership. Lithuanian Foreign Minister Landsbergis said that if I had a nickel for every time a Chinese ship was dragging its anchor across the bottom of the Baltic Sea in the vicinities of important cables, I would have 2 nickels, which is not very much, but it is weird that it happens twice. I think that's very true. So the activity of Chinese vessels in the Baltic Sea itself is a cause for serious concern. A second point of relevance, I think, is what Rory Metcalf has called the demonstration effect, meaning that what happens in one theater is being watched and has an effect on deterrence calculations in the other region. So we can be pretty sure that with the Taiwan issue in mind, that China is very closely watching the West's reaction to the war in Ukraine in general, and also the reactions by countries like Finland, as well as Poland perhaps, to this hybrid warfare that is ongoing. The third point, I think, of relevance is the securitization of everything. Meaning that there's no longer a separation between hard and soft security, between military concerns and non-traditional security. So military, economic, environmental dimensions are all inseparable nowadays. And also, the second thing that relates to this is the idea that security needs to be comprehensive. And this is very much at the core of the Finnish security policy, that everything is joined, and also there has to be cooperation between civil and military levels. So between authorities, between businesses, NGOs, and also by citizens. Everybody is jointly responsible for a country's security and for a society's vital functions. And I think this was very visible also in the Christmas Day disruption. We'll talk more about that later. A fourth aspect is the importance of simply cooperation. I think the Finnish case clearly shows how important that cooperation is at the bilateral level, at the sub-regional level, at the trans-regional level, and at the multilateral level. Finland-Sweden cooperation has always been very tight. Sub-regional, it would be the Nordic Council, EU level as well. At the trans-regional level, you can look at the example of the European Centre of Excellence on countering hybrid threats. It's based in Helsinki, which is open to membership from EU as well as NATO countries, and it was basically to provide expertise and training as well in order to counter this emerging hybrid threats. And then Finland also joined NATO's Maritime Center for the Security of Critical Undersea Infrastructure. So I think there is quite a lot of scope for maybe lessons to be drawn by Asian countries, but also maybe possibilities to cooperate between Asia and Europe on training, capacity building, exchanging best practices, and so on. Think of coast guards, civil authorities, including in maritime domain awareness. And what is becoming longer more important is undersea domain awareness. And then finally, I would like to mention connectivity, because there's still plenty of synergies and unfulfilled potential, let's say, between Asia and Europe in the sphere of sustainable connectivity and supply chain resilience. Finland, by the way, is the only EU member state, I think, with a global gateway ambassador. So the global gateway, as you might know, being the European Union's policy for connectivity and also to cooperate with other countries in third regions. There is now the EU-Japan Connectivity Partnership, there is the EU-India Connectivity Partnership. So there's lots of scope there still to cooperate in maritime security. But the fact is that not much has happened in the past 4 or 5 years. So plenty of scope there to elaborate and to cooperate more. For example, on cable systems between India, Middle East, Europe, and also on the modernization, for example, in Africa of critical maritime hubs. I think I'll stop that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Since we've been discussing East Asian security since morning, so I would like to be brief and simple. I'm not here to bash anybody. Very happy to be in Warsaw. First, I think as we all know that the East Asian region, including Southeast Asia in the so-called East Asian region, because the old meaning of East Asia is only for countries like China, Japan, and Korea. But to leave Southeast Asia out of the picture, I think it's incomplete, rather, and you will not be able to understand the whole situation in the region. The East Asian region is currently navigating a complex landscape of maritime security challenges, with traditional and non-traditional security threats posing risk to both regional and global security. The region, I mean the Southeast Asian region, I want to emphasize, is one of the most geopolitically and geostrategically significant areas in the world, but they have their own challenges, which have been discussed, and I will just mention a few. Actually, Southeast Asia consists of 10 small countries, but altogether we have a huge population, more than 600 million. And these countries are not only connected, put together in one ASEAN region, but countries are connected. Let's say some are members of the OIC, others are members of the G20. Malaysia and Indonesia have joined recently BRICS, and other countries have bilateral alliances or treaties with other major powers. So the connectivity is very, very big, I should say. So what is important, I think, how we respond to the threats discussed this morning and also just now. Malaysia is a small country. However, this year, 2025, we are the chairman of ASEAN, or the chair, we hold the chair of ASEAN. So there's a lot of expectation as to what Malaysia can do, because the way we respond to these threats is quite different. We are part of the South China Sea claimants, and yet Malaysia's response to China, the so-called China threat, is quite different from, let's say, the Philippines or Vietnam. People have accused Malaysia or have asked me and said, why is your country so pro-China? I said, no, it is not pro-China. But, I mean, we want to remain friendly with China, but at the same time, we are conscious or aware of the fact that if you are asked to choose, if you ask Malaysians to choose in terms of security between China and the United States, they will definitely say not China. There's a deficit in security trust about China. However, we do not want to be forced to take sides in the dispute. One, dispute in South China Sea. Number two, the rivalry between major powers. So this is how we respond to the crisis or to the conflict. So we have made quite an effort to address maritime security challenges. Why specifically maritime security challenge? Because Malaysia has declared itself since 2019 a maritime nation. We have been a maritime nation for hundreds of years, but it's only in 2019 that Malaysia says, oh, finally we are a maritime nation. But our neighbors, Singapore is a maritime city. Philippines, archipelago, Indonesia, the largest archipelago. So Southeast Asia is what they call the bridge or the linchpin between Indian Ocean, South China Sea and the Pacific. So in this situation, I think countries in that region must be careful in how they respond to crisis. Number one, we don't want to take sides. Number two, we take care of our national sovereignty very well. So we prefer cooperation. China has, well, not to say invaded, but has so-called violated, sometimes entered into our water or airspace, and yet we don't say, hey, careful, we're going to shoot you. No. We said, okay, what's your problem? So this is how we talk to them. So there are many efforts at addressing maritime security challenges. Let me just tell you a few. We have in that region 3 types of cooperation when it comes to maritime security. One is bilateral, between a country and the other. Secondly, Philippines, multilateral, this is common. And thirdly, which I find very, very interesting, is what we call minilateral. So, you know, between several or few countries of Southeast Asia, especially between Malaysia, Philippines, Indonesia, and of course Singapore, because we are held together by waters. Indonesia, Malaysia, and Singapore controls the Straits of Malacca. That's a very important, you know, waterway. Malaysia, Philippines, Vietnam, we are involved in the part of the claimants of South China Sea. So we do have cooperation, very important. Why minilateral? Because we think that minilateral cooperation serves us better. We know, you know, let's say 3 or 2 countries, 4 countries in the region, we're facing the same problem. Therefore, we look towards the same or similar response to these problems. Multilateral would mean, you know, extra regional powers, and sometimes getting involved with extra regional powers, especially major powers, can be quite troublesome. Because they might say, okay, they want to impose their views on us, but we say, no, let's handle our own problem. And but because we are small countries, we cannot afford to fulfill the task on our own. Therefore, we need your cooperation or collaboration. That is how we collaborate with the United States. We collaborate with Australia. Although politically sometimes we don't agree with one another, we collaborate with Japan very well. Of course, Japan is one of Malaysia's best partners or friends for a very long time. All right, so some of the existing maritime security cooperation in ASEAN would include the minilateral, as I mentioned. For example, the Malacca Straits patrol, and then you have eyes in the skies. And this, mind you, is with the blessing of major power like the United States, or also with the support of Australia. Australia has been very, very active in multilateral security, maritime security cooperation in Southeast Asia. They hosted last year ASEAN-Australia Maritime Cooperation, which my Prime Minister was there, and we were there. So I think this is a very good way of responding. When you are small, when you lack capability, when you depend on major powers, we rely on their support and cooperation, but at the same time, we do not want to be overwhelmed by them. So this is, I think, to me, the way small countries in Southeast, in ASEAN, respond to this situation. I think it makes sense. We do not want to have enemies. We want to keep old friends, traditional friends. The United States is our old friends. Japan is an old friend. China, to most of Southeast Asia, is what I term as enemy turned friend. Friendship because economy. The economic connection between ASEAN countries and China is big. China is our largest trading partner. Europe is our old friend. However, Europe, I think, in my view, and from the view of a few countries in Southeast Asia, Europe's position in Southeast Asia has declined. After the Second World War, Europe had to leave Southeast Asia. France left Indochina, Britain left Malaysia, Singapore, the Indonesians kicked the Dutch out of their territory. So Europe tried to make a comeback, but not successful. Why? Because the United States came in almost immediately and dominated the entire region. And we were very grateful to the United States because they helped us fight the so-called communist insurgencies in the region. So, and United States were, or was at a time, the largest trading partner for many ASEAN countries. However, today, the place has been taken over by China. But we do not want to create an enemy out of China. At the same time, we want to keep the friendship of the United States. So for most countries in the region, smaller countries, the policy is what we call hedging. You cannot do bandwagoning. We don't want to do balancing because small countries not worth to do balancing. So hedging, keeping your eggs in many baskets. So at the moment it works, and now Russia is coming in quite, how do you say, they're making much efforts to come into ASEAN, to come to Southeast Asia. Okay. So in conclusion, I think maritime security cooperation in Southeast Asia has been going on quite well, and of course there are possibilities for extending that cooperation, and especially with Europe, because I think you should come into Southeast Asia, but on your own, not as a deputy marshal to the United States. Thank you.
Professor RUHANAS, thank you very much. There are only 10 minutes in the basket, okay? Now, the next speaker is Professor PEDROZO of the United States.
Thank you. My topic is sharing a U.S. perspective on maritime security in East Asia. I'll begin by our U.S. Indo-Pacific strategy under the last administration, and I think under the new administration will remain the same, is premised in part on advancing a free and open Indo-Pacific to drive regional prosperity and bolster Indo-Pacific security. And what that requires is strengthening the collective capacity of all like-minded U.S. allies and partners in the region, as well as non-aligned states in the region. Our first and foremost focus is on our treaty alliances. We have 5 treaty partners, a defense treaty in Asia, with Australia, Japan, Korea, Philippines, and Thailand. And then our second area of focus would be strengthening our relationship with our leading regional partners like India, Indonesia, Malaysia, Mongolia, New Zealand, Singapore, Taiwan, Vietnam, and the Pacific Island states. Now we have a lot of, we engage in a lot of maritime security activities in the region, some of which are bilateral, like Maritime with the Philippines, or our cooperative approach readiness exercises with a number of countries in the region, Southeast Asia cooperation and training exercises throughout the region. We have shipwrighter agreements with a number of the Pacific Island states, where we do joint patrols with the Pacific Island nations to help them combat IUU fishing. We have a number of multilateral engagements, such as the Enforcement Cooperation Cell that's operating out of Japan for TPRK, sanctions enforcement, AUKUS, the Proliferation Security Initiative. There's a lot of things that are going on. We do unilateral things like freedom of navigation operation, probably 8 challenges against South China, South China Sea claims a year, and probably 1 transit through the Taiwan Strait every year. But one other mechanism that we use that I'm going to talk about for the rest of the time is our initiative with Quad, which came into existence in 2004 after the Indian Ocean tsunami to help coordinate humanitarian assistance and disaster relief operations throughout the region. The Quad has since then developed into a much broader focus and in advancing and maintaining a common vision of a free and open Indo-Pacific region. And we do that through building capacity of regional partners and maintaining maritime security and enhancing maritime domain awareness. And there's a clear recognition amongst all the Quad partners that maintenance of peace, safety, security, and stability in the maritime domain underpins the development and prosperity of the entire Indo-Pacific region. So, as I said, the Quad started as a HADR type of an organization, but it also has a large maritime security aspect to it now. One of which is in 2022, the Quad launched the Indo-Pacific Partnership for Maritime Domain Awareness, with the understanding that you cannot have maritime security unless you have effective maritime domain awareness. One doesn't go without the other. So you have to have MDA, maritime domain awareness, in order to ensure peace, stability, and prosperity. And also, through a enhanced maritime domain awareness, we will allow our partners to better monitor their waters to provide capacity building measures throughout the region. And then the secondary role of the initiative is to curb Chinese coercive behavior in the region, especially in the East China Sea, vis-a-vis the Japanese in Senkaku, and in the South China Sea, vis-a-vis a number of states, in particular the Philippines, received the brunt of China's coercive behavior in the last couple of years, as Jay mentioned earlier. So what the initiative does is it provides really near real-time integrated and cost-effective maritime domain awareness picture, so a common operating picture that can be shared amongst the various regional areas. So we want to try to link the Indian Ocean with the small Pacific Island nations, the Southeast Asia, etc. So we do that by providing our partners in these various regions the ability to fully monitor their waters to uphold a free and open Indo-Pacific. One of the biggest problems we face today with regard to maritime security is the problem of dark shipping. You have vessels that turn off their automatic identification systems to engage in illicit activity, primarily sanctions violations, transporting oil, in the case of Russia, for example, IUU fishing, particularly in a part of China's distant water fleet. So this is one of the problem areas we have to get after. The initiative provides the capability or enhances the capability of the partners to track dark shipping and other tactical level activities in the area, and it improves our partners' abilities to respond to various issues, in particular monitoring their maritime spaces, countering IUU fishing, and securing the vital sea lines of communication that go through the region, as well as be able to enforce their own domestic laws within their waters. We're working with various regional fusion centers to try to provide technology and data that can be shared amongst all of these fusion centers, so that there's a good information sharing. So we're trying to link the information fusion centers in India, Singapore, Solomon Islands, as well as in Vanuatu. And since 2022, when the Maritime Domain Awareness Initiative was started, the Quad has successfully scaled the program across the region throughout the various forums that I discussed, and has specifically assisted over 25 countries in accessing dark vessel maritime domain awareness data so they can better monitor the activities in their exclusive economic zone to prevent other unlawful activities. In 2024, the Quad began a new initiative under the MDA initiative, and that is to provide some enhanced technology to our partners in the region to better sharpen their MDA picture throughout the region. And we're looking at providing technologies that will allow for interoperability between all the fusion centers to conduct multilateral maritime exercises and to demonstrate joint capabilities. Other Quad initiatives that have come out of the MBA initiative is the Maritime Initiative for Training in the Indo-Pacific. It was established last year, and what it does is it provides a tool to other Quad partners to monitor and secure their waters, enforce their laws, and deter unlawful behavior. And it provides a comprehensive and complementary training across various legal, operational, technical, maritime security, and law enforcement domains to enhance their maritime security within their own water. Other Quad initiatives are the Indo-Pacific Logistics Network, which was also established last year, and it's a pilot program that the 4 Quad nations will share their airlift capabilities or capacity to leverage their collective logistics strength to support civilian response to natural disaster and more rapidly and efficiently across the Indo-Pacific region. And in addition, in 2025, they will be launching a Quad at Sea Ship Observer mission, which seeks to enhance cooperation between the U.S. Coast Guard, the Japanese Coast Guard, the Australian Border Force, and the Indian Coast Guard. And this will include personnel exchanges to improve interoperability between the various Quad members. China is always a problem. As Jay mentioned, the situation in the East China Sea and the South China Sea remain particularly troublesome for regional states. China has militarized its disputed feature in the Spratlys by building a number of military installations on 7 features that allow them to project power throughout the region. It engages in a number of coercive, dangerous, and intimidating maneuvers by their Coast Guard and the People's Armed Forces Maritime Militia in order to disrupt other nations' offshore resource exploration activities for oil and gas and fishery. The Quad has indicated that it is opposed to any unilateral actions on the part of China that seek to change the status quo in the South China Sea or in the East China Sea through force or coercion, and that any maritime dispute should be resolved through peaceful means in accordance with international law, including the Law of the Sea Convention. So in conclusion, the Quad is committed to upholding international law and a rule-based international order, and maintaining an inclusive, free and open Indo-Pacific region. The last point there, as our chairman mentioned at the beginning, that no one state can maintain maritime security throughout the region. It has to be a collective effort. All states have a role in doing that. One of the questions posed this morning was, will the United States be an isolationist nation under the Trump administration, or will they remain engaged in the region? I think that they will remain engaged in the region, but that'll come with a price. There will be an expectation that allies and partners that are engaged will live up to their end of the bargain. The days of relying on the security umbrella for free are over. So if you want to engage with the United States, I think there's going to be an expectation that countries fulfill their obligations under that partnership. Thank you.
Next speaker,
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a pleasure to speak on this panel, and I will concentrate on the German Indo-Pacific strategy. So I will try to bring your focus to the European perspective on the maritime problems in Southeast Asia and in Asia more generally. Germany. Germany is, without any dispute, the most important European country, and one of those countries that over the last 3 decades, as one author wrote, didn't have an Asia strategy, it had only a Chinese strategy. In practice, because formally it published it first in 2023. In the turn from the second to the third decade of the 21st century, and the German-Chinese relations started to deteriorate, and this deterioration had strategic and economic aspect. And today many see the German foreign policy, or the German policy towards the region, as inconsistent. What I will try to do in my today's speech is demonstrate you that actually this strategy is consistent, and we call it sum up as a soft balancing. First few words, what is a soft balancing? Soft balancing is a strategy that states apply at a low level of threat. And there is no question that the threat level for Germany from different disputes that take place in East Asia and Southeast Asia is much lower than from the countries that are in the region. That's first. And second, for the United States, which was for decades a local hegemony. And my argument is that this relative low perception of threats allowed Germany to follow this strategy. And this strategy has three dimensions. The first dimension is a diplomatic one, the second dimension is an institutional one, and the third one is economic dimension. On the diplomatic level, Germany, or German Chancellor, was the first European politician that visited Xi Jinping, the president of China, after he was elected for his next term and practically for till his death. In November 2022, and that was covered by media all over the world and discussed very controversially. But already these visits show that the German policy has changed, because Angela Merkel, his predecessor, and Gerhard Schröder, who was the chancellor from 1998 to 2005, visited China first. Olaf Scholz went first to Japan. So it was maybe in April 2022. So maybe it was a small sign, but nevertheless symbolic sign that the German diplomatic activities have changed, and without enlisting all visits we see from at least 2020, so first there were online meetings till today, a huge activity of the German diplomacy in the region. So yes, there was the next visit in China of Olaf Scholz, there was a visit of Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock, after which she made a lot of critical comments toward China. But at the same time, we have the visits of Chancellor and Foreign Minister in other countries of the region, South Korea, Japan, Philippines, Indonesia, and we can make the list even longer. The second dimension is the institutional dimension. And in this respect, the major demonstration of the shift in the German policy towards the region is not participation in the fact that Germany does not participate in Belt and Road Initiative. Germany joined AIB Bank in 2015, and as Belt and Road Initiative was announced, there was a lot of positive comments toward the initiative in Germany, and within 1.5–2 years the whole perspective has changed, and the final shift toward the view on such institutional cooperation with China was brought by the BRA, so the Federation of the German Industry, with its paper from 2019, which actually initiated the whole shift in the German foreign policy. And the third dimension is the economic one, the famous de-risking, the term that was first used by Chancellor Scholz for what he was criticized. Now Germany is criticized for not enough means implemented as a de-risking strategy, and no doubt that's the most controversial element in the Germany's soft balancing toward China, because we have very complicated picture here. So the Chancellor invented the word, or he used it as the first politician, but on another hand, the German government leaves the risk to the companies, what is assumed as not effective way. And another important point is that the German companies, Volkswagen, BASF, and Mercedes are the three biggest foreign investors in China in the current, in 2024, in the last year. And on another hand, the small and medium-sized companies, German companies, are not so optimistic about China, and some of them are even leaving. So the last second trip of Chancellor Scholz to China was a nice demonstration of that, because of course the German CEOs of the biggest companies, these famous German multinational corporations were there, but as the press reported, CEOs of smaller companies were not so interested, and actually they didn't jump. The last element that I would like to cover in my speech is the military presence of Germany in the region, because if we talk about maritime dimension, we cannot forget about two frigates, Bayern and Baden-Württemberg, that were sent by Germany to the Indo-Pacific region. But as it was, without going into the details of both trips, as one of the previous speakers said, Europe is supposed to be more engaged in Indo-Pacific. The point is how. So yesterday I read, I think it was an article published a few days ago, and the most important, the decision taken a few days ago, that German Navy will acquire 4 new submarines. Good news for sure for German Navy, but still the question is which European country has the capability to play any significant role in the Pacific, and Germany is for sure not one of these countries. Zeitenwende that was announced 3 years ago and did not change much, and for sure for the next few years it will not change as much, at least as many would wish. Whether everyone would wish is another question. So as was said by the previous defense minister, it was the Bayern visit, the frigate Bayern visit, was of symbolic value to demonstrate to the nations of Southeast Asia and of Asia that Germany supports this free line of communications, and for sure it's doing that. But between wish, expectations, and capabilities, there is still a big difference. Okay, I will finish, because when the chair is moving, that's the big signal. Thank you very much.
Today's great power rivalry is not only about power and interest, but also about principles and world views. The Western countries, including NATO countries and Japan and the United States, uphold the rules-based international order built upon the principle of the rule of law. It's a democratic view of the world, reflecting the modern style of democracy and also the Anglo-American legal culture. But the Chinese world view is different. They prefer a hierarchical view, and it is not democratic. But please note that China's statements are very similar to ours, but they do very much different from what they say. And actually, China is very assertive and massive flexing at sea in recent months than before. And actually, last month I heard a few Chinese experts say in an international conference that the South China Sea is peaceful and that China's coastal ships running against the Philippine ships is hyperbole by Western media, and that water cannon is not the kind of weapon and different from bullet, and that China is not doing land reclamation, but just enhancing facilities in land, and that there is no high seas in the South China Sea. And China was relatively silent about the cleaning of the 9-dash line for a while after 2016 arbitration ruling. But as China found our pressure discontinued, China released a new map in August 2023, and in this map it added another dash in the east of Taiwan to create a 10-dash line. And China is trying to change the status quo by force as well, contrary to what they say, as shown in this slide. And those actions, particularly against the vessels having sovereign immunity status, could be seen as an act of war. And China has been operating its coastguard ships and maritime militia ships in the East China Sea as well. And those ships often encroach into the Japanese waters around the Central Islands. And actually, it is very, very high number and almost a record high in 2023 and 2024. But so far, the Chinese activities in the East China Sea seem to be less violent than those in the South China Sea. But as the balance of power in the East China Sea is being tilted for the Chinese side, the South China Sea today may be the East China Sea tomorrow. The Northeast Asians couldn't be indifferent to the deterioration of the situation in the South China Sea. Now, China has been doing a large-scale land reclamation on 7 features on the Strawberry Island. And if these features of the Strawberry Islands are used for a full-scale military purpose, it could significantly change the security environment of the Indo-Pacific region. And as the East Asian Sea is a big artery of the world economy and trade, we must work together to address China's assertiveness and to establish a stable international order at East Asian Sea. International order is a system of power as well as a system of norms. And the history of the South China Sea clearly tells us that China always tries to take advantage of power vacuum, beginning with China's occupation of the eastern half of the Paracel Islands soon after the French withdrawal from Indochina in the 1950s. And in order to build a system of power, we must fill in the power vacuum and retrieve the balance of power. There are 3 points. First, enhancement of presence of like-minded countries in close cooperation with the regional countries. And second, enhancement of alliances and partnerships. And third, fast development, particularly for not limited to maritime security and law enforcement, because particularly in Southeast Asia, there are lots of security challenges, even in maritime security field. And in order to build a more effective system of law, the following 2 points are important. First, we must reject cynicism on the power of international law. Law is not powerless or silent, even in time of war. And second, we must win public support in lawfare with which China engineers. China's legal statement, similar to ours, as I said before, China's deed is different from its word. However, as all of us live on land, it's hard to know what it is doing in the middle of the sea. So it is important to share the information about what the Chinese are doing out there and to disclose it internationally. And finally, I'd like to add a few words about the security cooperation. Partnership is not a burden, but a great asset for all of us. Partnership between NATO and IB4, I mean, 4 countries of the Indo-Pacific region, including Japan, and also in partnership with the Quad, as already some people mentioned, and partnership between ASEAN and Japan. These these partnerships are in great progress. And as time is very much limited, I do not have any time to tell you about the frameworks for these partnerships. But anyway, necessary political frameworks are already there and established. So it is important to put them into real practice. I stop here, and I'd like to ask all the presenters to come back to the stage and ready for taking questions. About 40 minutes until 6 o'clock, and I'm sure that all of you have many questions to the panelists. So it's time for me to ask questions or make comments. So please raise your hand, and please identify yourself before asking questions or making comments. Anyone? You are quiet. Okay, yeah.
Question to Professor PEDROZO. Very much in response to Dr. Sensei's point about how partnership should not be seen as a burden rather than an asset. Do you think that will stick with the new US administration?
As I mentioned, I think the new administration will engage with countries, but there'll be an expectation that the countries that we're engaging with will provide their fair share of the burden. For example, if there are NATO countries that provide less than 1% of their GDP to their national defense, that probably isn't something that the new administration isn't going to like. But if you look at Japan, for example, it's increased its defense budget significantly. Australia has increased its defense budget significantly. The Philippines has increased its defense budget significantly. Those are the kind of engagements that I think the new administration will be looking to exploit, because they're pulling their fair weight of the burden of the engagement. As I mentioned, the U.S. can no longer sustain providing a free U.S. security umbrella around the world. We just don't have the capacity to do that anymore. It requires our allies and partners and like-minded nations to cooperate and share the burdens that we all need to share in order to maintain peace and security throughout the world. So the days of the free rider are over under the Trump administration.
Can I just add to the question of Jen? What is fair? What is the fair share? What is the obligation?
Well, I think in the NATO context, for example, there are countries that might have 3-4% of their GDP going to the NATO defense. I think that would be fair. Certainly, it's not going to be a 50-50 split. That would not be fair. But I think fairness is in the eyes of the beholder.
The beholder is Donald Trump.
Yeah.
Right. Next question. You go first.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. I think excellent panel, and I thoroughly enjoyed most of the remarks. My questions to Bart. Enjoyed your remarks about connectivity. This is about the global gateway. I think after 3 or 4 years, we need to have a realistic assessment. How does it really help you to engage with the Indo-Pacific partners? There are two views. As I'm observing from the regions where you are, I think there is a momentum which has been built. It has helped use Indo-Pacific outreach. There is an engagement strategy that's onboarded. Many countries have relied on the global gateway. But if you see more from the critical point of view, there is this view that it has not really moved forward. It has not really done well. When we have a new commission today, this year, after the election in EU, how do you really see EU's global gateway strategy in terms of infrastructure, connectivity developments is going to unfold in Indo-Pacific? Second, how far it is going to supplement or complement the Indo-Pacific strategy? Because there is a talk today in EU that probably EU would be revisiting its Indo-Pacific strategy to a great extent in the union of a lot of nationalist-oriented political party coming to power. There might be a lot of focus on the domestic issues within the EU, particularly to resolve the war, try to have economic consolidation, try to have much more economic and political cohesiveness within the EU framework. So how do you really see? Do you see that global gateway has been really a utterly failure or not really a very successful strategy? Or do you really see there is a chance of going forward and doing, even though there is a government change or a new political setup has come in the EU framework?
Thank you. That's a very interesting question, also a very complicated one. You're absolutely right. Progress in the global gateway has been very slow, but I think that, let's say, as of last year, there are sufficient data available to actually see progress, that there are now actually projects, in the first place in Africa. There's also a data project in Latin America, so I think especially in those two continents there is progress visible, and there's actually money being put behind the initiative. So certainly there is progress, but thus far the problem has been, I would say, at least twofold. One issue has been with branding and with selling the global gateway as an image or as a brand. I think if you ask somebody on the street, whether it is here in Poland or in Finland or sometimes probably even in Brussels, if you ask people what is the global gateway, most people will not be able to provide you an answer. So it's knowledge of the brand among the general public, but also among companies, for example. There has been lots of talk about providing investment guarantees to companies. So also in the private sector, it has not taken off as a successful brand. But maybe it is still early days, and I think there's slowly progress to be seen. How does it complement with the Indo-Pacific strategy? I think there's lots of potential there, especially in light of the EU-Japan partnership on sustainable connectivity that equally has not taken off at all. So when you can see that there has been progress in the global gateway, and of course Japan has been very active. It has been a connectivity superpower for many decades already. But the cooperation between the EU and Japan has been really slow and is not taking off the ground. So there's multiple reasons for that. And those underlying obstacles to cooperation need to be overcome in order for the EU to be able to, let's say, join the global gateway and also achieve some results in Asia and in the Pacific, and thereby implement the strategy. But it's a very complicated question.
Thank you. I have one or two questions and one or two comments. My question is really addressed to Professor Harun. Normally, the way that conventional wisdom has it is that the only method of standing up to a bully is to stand up to it. Now, my question to you is really, do you think that China is a bully in the first place? And number two, if it is a bully, would you not think that you need to stand up to a bully rather than simply acquiesce to a bully? Assuming that you believe that China is a bully, and if you don't, then I'm even more interested in that part. And my comments are really to BART, specifically. And the first of them is that we need to be very careful about Coast Guard interactions. Coast Guard interactions have jurisdictional problems. And different Coast Guards have different jurisdiction of operations. And while engaging Coast Guards for capacity building, capability enhancement, sharing best practices is all great. As soon as you try and do an operation, you can land up into unintended consequences. For example, Kenya's Coast Guard has jurisdiction only within its territorial sea. India's Coast Guard has jurisdiction only up to the limits of the exclusive economic zone. I don't know every country's limitations, but they exist, and you need to be careful about how we copy the Chinese model, which is valid because their domestic law, however flawed, does give them some cover within the South China Sea, and expanding that to other areas or bringing other areas into that area. My second point is with regard to this MDA. I have a real problem with this word, with this term. I think what we need is maritime. If you're God, then you have MDA. By definition of MDA, then not a sparrow falls, but and in the meanwhile, when you're practicing to become God, the probably more useful term might be maritime situational awareness. And this is a useful term because it allows you to then, it forces you to cooperate with somebody else who has maritime situational awareness, and in the process, you will move towards maritime domain awareness. So maritime domain awareness is an aspirational term. Maritime situational awareness is a real term, and if you have enough cooperation for maritime situational awareness, you will start to approach maritime domain awareness. So I just have a problem with that. My other real problem is with this business of maritime connectivity. In New Delhi, the elite in New Delhi live in a part of Delhi called the Lutein Bungalow Zone. And when you go to the Lutein Bungalow Zone, there's a guy who stands there with his arms crossed, and you meet up with him, and you want to go to a party in Lutein Bungalow Zone, and you meet him, and he says, "What's the password?" And you say, password. And then you say maritime connectivity. He immediately beams and allows you to go in, and now you have 300 people in that room, none of whom know anything more about maritime connectivity than the password. So I want to be, if I understand, I'm going to make a suggestion. Most of our discussions, they operate at 38,000 feet. At 38,000 feet, sirs, ladies, anybody can fly a plane. The trick is how to make that plane land without crash and burn. So when we talk about maritime connectivity, you need to at least have the following minimum specificities involved in our assessment. This is just, it isn't really best to use as an individual, but you're the one who brought this up. So you need to figure out which are the ports you want to connect in maritime connectivity. Which ports? Then over what medium? Do you want it to be riverine? Do you want it to be oceanic? Do you want it to be digital? Are all the three involved? What platforms will be moving on those? Will there be ships? Will there be data streams? What are the platforms? Then, what are those platforms going to carry? Are they going to carry cargo? Are they going to carry human beings? Are they going to carry data packets? Are they going to be all of the above? Which ones do you want to talk about? Then you have to figure out what policies have you got in place, which will define what processes, what procedures, how do you sign, how do you write? Do you write from right to left or left to right? And sometimes you are reading from top to bottom. Where do you sign? And since we haven't got processes in place yet, this is an important part of how you work out whether you're making progress in maritime domain awareness, in maritime connectivity or not. And finally, you have the rules that will determine what is your rules-based order. Without this, we will end up in a large amount of conversation which is attractive but not sufficiently meaningful. On the other hand, we will also end up in missing the opportunities that will arise as soon as we give specificity. And last issue is with regards to the same connection. Yeah, I'm going to stop. It is this that when you talk about mega connectivity projects of IMEC and INSPC, these are very, very, very complicated processes, and their economic viability needs to be separated from the political. And for you, last point is that when China says that the South China Sea is peaceful, you have to worry about how they spell the word peace. Sometimes it is P-I-T-C. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Professor Fonda. Now, is China a bully? Well, it depends on how you define a bully. If it's a great power that belittles everybody, then that will include the United States, the EU, and every big power. No. As once said by our former Prime Minister, he said, China is an opportunity. And I think for 20 years of Dr. Mahathir, the former Prime Minister, being in power, he established good relations with China, and we earned, our respect. So to Malaysia, as a small country, China is not a bully, it is an opportunity. Well, even if you're not a bully, I think we take care of our pride, national sovereignty, security. So if it comes to that, yes, we will stand up to anybody, including China. And we did stand up to China on a few issues on South China Sea. Well, Malaysia has to be careful in its relations with China. Probably, well, as you know, about 28% of Malaysians are of Chinese origin, and they have very, very close socio-cultural connection with China. In fact, one of the reasons why Malaysia recognized China in 1974 was because of this domestic situation, to sort of gain the hearts and mind of, well, at the time, of the Chinese. So today we keep that relationship. A lot of commerce with China, but also tourism. Chinese tourists visit Malaysia We have very close educational and cultural cooperation, and Malaysians go to China to study, vice versa. So I think by taking China as an opportunity, the country did benefit quite a lot. And we tell China, well, we are friends with you. However, Malaysia has long-standing friends. We have the United States, we have Japan, the United Kingdom, Australia, all these big countries in the Commonwealth, Singapore. They are our friends. And I believe, and we believe, if it comes to that, they are ready to provide us protection. And we tell China. So you cannot, play the fool with us. We want to be friends with you because, well, there is economic, socio-cultural relationship and advantages, but we will defend our sovereignty and security. And we tell them we have friends. Friends.
Just a short response. Yeah, thank you for your very insightful comments about Coast Guards and interaction and the legal restrictions. You're 100% right, of course. I think there's also a reason why we had to wait until 3 weeks ago before a vessel suspect of damaging critical infrastructure in the Baltic Sea was being detained. It was the first time ever that Finland managed, and I think the main reason is exactly because of the different legal complex restrictions that are in place and are different for every country. About capacity building, when it comes to Coast Guards, I was thinking in the first place of the Japanese model, who have been doing this very well, I think, in Southeast Asia, providing OSA official security assistance to countries in Southeast Asia, providing both the hardware as well as training and capacity building. So I thought that could maybe be a model to follow to show that cooperation in third countries is possible between Coast Guards. So my comment was just at a general level. Then as for, of course, maritime security, maritime connectivity, yeah, of course, it's a massive area and you have to be really careful what you suggest. But the two projects that I mentioned, the data cable project as part of the IMAC, I think has already begun. So there is some progress there, making this cable from, in the context of the EU-India framework or a connectivity partnership. And in the case of the EU-Japan one, I mentioned critical maritime hubs in Africa, and there both the EU and Japan are interested in, I forgot the name of the corridor, but it ends in Kenya and Mombasa, and Japan is there heavily invested in developing the ports there. EU is also interested in the same land corridor, so there could be some kind of overlaps and synergies to be explored there. That's my only thank you.
Well, I'll just say I don't make the words up, so if you want to use maritime situational awareness, that's fine with me. I mean, that's really what we're talking about when we're talking about MDA is situational awareness. I don't like the term gray zone. I think gray zone has empowered China and Russia to engage in activities because they know they're not going to receive a forceful response from the country. And it all goes back to the Nicaragua and the platform cases where you have the gap theory, which, if you look at the gap theory, has it really served its purpose of preventing conflict? No. It's encouraged conflict. It's encouraged states to engage in activities that are below this gap threshold and allow them to get away with stuff that they shouldn't get away with. So at the end of the day, we should have one threshold, use of force, non-use of force. Maybe the ICJ got that wrong in the Nicaraguan platform cases because it really hasn't served its purpose at the least bit.
Thank you very much. Admiral Chuma correctly said that different Coast Guard have different jurisdictions, right? And also I have to mention that different Coast Guards have different missions. for example, the Japanese Coast Guard is purely law enforcement agency, but the Chinese Coast Guard are dual missions. They are not only law enforcement agency, but also actually they have military mission as well. So it makes our response very complicated. So we have to bear that in mind as well. Anyway, any other questions? Yes.
Thank you, sir. I'm Paul Bullock. I'm a recent graduate from the Faculty of Political Science and International Studies. First of all, I would like to thank all the guests and RIPS for co-organizing this event. 徳地先生、本日のイベントを企画していただき、本当に感謝しています。My question is to Professor Ulatowski regarding Germany's self-balancing strategy. We have the German elections coming up shortly. Most likely, Prime Minister will be Friedrich Merz, and I just wonder how his premiership will affect the Germany's strategy when it comes also to the Pacific, to maritime issues, and largely also how Europe will be affected, also keeping in mind with Donald Trump's administration being in power in Washington. Thank you.
Thank you for this question. I think on the ideological term, a new coalition which probably will be under CDU and Friedrich Merz will be much more pro-American, but still there is the question of what the German Marine can do, and for the decade or more than a decade to come, there is there will be not much difference. So probably the vocabulary can change a little bit into more pro-American or China critical, but the capability to do anything will stay very low. Second, I think there is a broad agreement in the German political class that German companies supposed to stay in China. That's a huge market. China is the biggest export market for German companies, so they will love to stay there. After all, after investing all these billions of euros, it makes perfect sense. And the third point, actually in the contradiction to the second one, if we follow the news from automobile market, yesterday it was announced that 2024 Porsche sold 20% less cars in China than 2023. Mercedes has similar numbers, BMW and Volkswagen too. And the real question, and probably the real German problem, is whether the Chinese need the Germans. It's not whether the German companies want to stay and the German government supports them or not. It's simply whether they still have enough to offer to the Chinese clients and whether the Chinese wants them or not.
Next question. All right.
I have a question to both Professor RAUL and my favorite John. I have a question to both of them. What could be what could be the strategy for Quad countries in Indo-Pacific region? Whether the Quad countries should go for a sea denial strategy or sea control strategy? Thank you.
Could you repeat?
What could be the broader strategy, a grand strategy for the Quad countries? It could be the sea denial strategy or sea control strategy.
Sea denial or sea control?
Yeah.
Well, I think on given the
as far as Chinese trade is concerned.
yeah, given that China's missile capabilities and its growing missile capabilities and the reach of those missiles now beyond the first island chain, I think it's going to be very difficult for any nation to, like the United States will be unable to have a carrier presence within striking range of Taiwan because we will be within the threat envelope of Chinese missiles, and it'll put the carrier at risk. And therefore, the carrier won't go into the threat envelope, which means it'll have to launch the aircraft from farther out, which means that the aircraft will have to be refueled before they can drop their ordnance, which means they will then be targetable by Chinese missiles because they're being refueled. So there's sea denial, sea control is going to be very difficult in a cross-strait scenario based on China's current missile capabilities. I'm not so, they have, I don't know if you had mentioned it earlier, but China has a large Navy, but it's not a tested Navy. Certainly they have a large number of ships, but can they do what they're expected to do? I don't know the answer to that, and I would suspect that they don't have the capability to do what they're expected to do.
Yeah, I just wanted to say 2 or 3 things here. One is that sea control and sea denial are wartime functions. There is no sea control and no sea denial as a concept in times short of armed conflict. It just doesn't exist. Sea control simply doesn't mean that you will control an entire sea area. It says that you will control a limited sea area for a specific period of time when you want to use it. And during that period of time and in that particular area, you won't countenance another country or another power stopping you from doing or using the sea for the purposes that you intend. So sea control and sea denial. When you want to use a certain sea area for a specific period of time, you will exercise your attempt to exercise sea control. When you don't want to use the sea area and you just don't want the other guy to use it, that sea area for that period of time, you will exercise sea denial. So I don't think that these are capable of being utilized as terms over large areas such as the whole South China Sea or the first island chain, which is even it's quite massive. Nobody wants to use well, that's really what I wanted to clarify. So a sea control is in a given area for a specific period of time, and the area itself is limited by whatever it is that you want to do. If you're looking at the kind of question that you've asked, that is command of the sea. And nobody looks at command of the sea anymore because nobody has that capacity and nobody has those capabilities anyway. And finally, when you talk about carriers and missile capabilities, it's a whole different discussion. I think that we could have it offline. It is a mistake, however, to think that because somebody else has a device that can kill you, then you can't do anything. For example, I'll try and bring it down to simplicity and stuff. For example, you're an infantry guy and I'm an infantry soldier, and you have a carbine and I have a carbine, so can you kill me? Yeah. Can I kill you? Yep. So what? Every military asset has an existential threat upon it all the time. Can an F-35 knock off a S-400 missile battery? Yep. Can the S-400 missile battery knock off an F-35? Yep. So what? So should we not build F-35s? Should we not have S-400s? So can the carrier be struck by a DF-26? Yeah. Can the carrier aircraft knock off the place from where the DF-26 was being launched in the first place? Yeah. So we will continue to have carriers, they will continue to be missiles. They're not either or propositions. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Okay. I just wanted to compliment your answer on Germany. I mean, our car industry has basically fallen asleep at the wheel for the last, I would say, 12 to 15 years. They knew what was coming, and they ignored it because they made a ton of money in China. If you look at the investments that were mentioned by BASF, Siemens, and our car companies in the last years, when diversification was already on the political agenda, not a single euro of these investments came from Germany. It was all profits that were reinvested in China. That's important to know. So their thinking and the way these companies are operating, I mean, these are not German companies in the sense that, yes, they have their headquarters in Germany, but they're multinational companies and they're driven by certain interests. The interests of shareholders, the bonuses for their CEOs, and the profit they make, because everything else depends on that. And then legal frameworks, reputation play a certain role. So they had the time of their life, and therefore they didn't make an effort to change their ways, because the model worked. And now the model doesn't work anymore, but this didn't fall out of the sky. And this is the dilemma, and therefore, I mean, the next government will come in, whether it's the CDU. You can always be very critical of anything if you're in the opposition, but if you're sitting in the chancellor's office and the lobbies are breathing down your neck, this is very different. And Germany is not the United States. We cannot put this kind of pressure on our companies because a lot of them are family-owned. You have to make a legally watertight framework to forbid them to do anything. We have some framework in place about investment. We're now talking about outbound investment as well, but it's mainly concerning inbound investment to Germany. So you need a legal framework in order to tell your companies what to do. And what they understand of diversification and de-risking, as von der Leyen calls it, is completely different from the logic of our governments. So if companies like BASF talk about de-risking, they mean China +1. And mostly they follow just their Chinese subcontractors and contractors because they diversify away from China. So they follow a different logic than the government has in mind when they talk about de-risking. So what we need is better stock taking, and I can tell you that companies are not eager to reveal their vulnerabilities and dependencies. But during COVID and during the Ukraine war, it has been revealed how vulnerable we are because of these dependencies. Has this brought a revolutionary change in the company's thinking? No, because the driving force is still the same. It's profit. It's not national security or, geostrategic thinking. And in the US, it seems that the administration is better able to somehow get the companies, or some companies, let's say, on board. Not everybody, of course, because the US is also not decoupling from China completely. Agriculture, who cares, whether you export soya to China or something. So we have to keep these different logics in mind.
Right. There are 5 more minutes. I'd like to take a question or one or two questions from young students.
Maybe I can answer.
Yeah, okay.
So my question is from the Professor RAUL, and about recently Trump had made some comments about nearest Panama Canal and the Greenland. So what do you think their focus will, the Trump 2.0 this administration, their focus will shift more near neighborhood maritime security, or their dependence will be more on India, Australia, or Japan, Korea?
I think people believe too much of what President-elect Trump has to say. Sometimes he says things just to see what kind of a reaction he gets. Is the United States going to invade Panama to regain the Panama Canal in the next 4 years? No. He's not going to do is the United States going to buy Greenland in the next 4 years? No, unless Denmark wants to sell it to us. So a lot of things that he is saying, and he's saying it to get a reaction. Maybe he thinks he's doing his reality TV shows that he did many years ago. But I think you have to take his comments in context, and some of them you can believe, some of them you can't believe. And you just can't believe everything that he says.
So, as you said, me, I'm not very much, let's say, expert in the Pacific thing, but as a student, I'm here, I was listening to what you say. Most of us were focusing on Trump as an individual, you as expert, because every time there's some bilateral agreement, there's some negotiation taking place. So why do we have to fear an individual, and what strategy or what kind of, let's say, a plan of action that the strategists or maybe the policymakers can put in order to prevent those kind of leaders to bring the changes? Because we fear an individual, yet we have institutions. Why don't we have strong institutions that will prevent these kind of leaders to change what we have aimed to do the best? Because when you say Trump is coming, maybe someone else will come and change. So what can we do to make sure that we do not have Trumpism in the future, and make sure that the international community that we're working for or we're aiming for to be the best, to be what we want? Thank you.
Well, that's a $1,000 question. There's always there's always going to be figures in the government that are more proactive than others in steering the direction of how certain things play out internationally. President Trump is, I think, an individual who's very proactive in international relations, so he's going to be very active in those discussions. Hopefully, the people that he brings into his cabinet will bring some rational thought to what he wants to do. I mean, that's the best we can hope for, is that he'll surround himself with good people, good smart people that'll be able to provide him with good advice on how to engage in certain activities.
Any other questions? All right.
And the last question there.
Okay.
So now, I'm from Africa, because you have Indo-Pacific, whatever, America, United States, Europe, but you don't include Africa. How will you succeed this without Africa? Because when we get to the United Nations, we all go together. The international maritime negotiation treaties will be also signed, and member states will vote. So how do you engage the African countries? Because we are about 55 countries. Then when you have your own decisions, own plans of action without involving other stakeholders, because I believe whatever security concern in these maritime or let's say legs, whatever, Africa is involved, because there's no one island, just country that is working alone. So it's about multilateralism. So how do you engage African countries in these matters?
I mean, from a multilateral aspect, how would the U.S. engage Africa in a multilateral context? Probably not at all. I think they would approach much like China. They would want to have bilateral engagement with Africa. I think resources is one area where Africa can have fruitful bilateral discussions, not only with the United States, but with other countries. As China tries to get a hold on certain rare earth metals and things like that, that's where Africa can come into play. They have a good card to play in when we're playing poker. I think you just have. I think you'll require to do bilateral engagement with the United States over issues. They're not going to go into Africa with a multilateral approach.
Yeah.
yes, but you know, the Africa, particularly you know, eastern part of Africa, of course, including South Africa, is part of the Indo-Pacific. Yeah. And the visions for free and open Indo-Pacific for many countries, of course, including Japan's vision, has Africa in its scope. So please do not misunderstand.
Yeah.
France as well,
Yeah.
from the beginning. It's included in the concept of the Indo-Pacific. So it goes from the eastern coast of Africa to the western coast of the Americas. The US definition is a bit different, which also has to do with the different commands. But in the French, because you know they have some assets off the coast of Africa, for them it was very natural to include it, and for Japan it was natural as well, because India sort of is the bridge and linkage here.
And so even so, India engages Africa multilaterally through the GAENS strategy. AIMS 2050, the United States actually does engage through the Africa Center for Strategic Studies in the Track 1.5, Track 2 forum, and they do this multilaterally. So the feeling that Africa is left out of these discussions is probably due to the theme being East Asia. So if we're moving the theme across from East Asia to Eastern Africa, it would be a large geographic shift.
Also, just to add what Tokuchi-san said, I think when Prime Minister Abe was there, he was the first one to talk about Asia-Africa Growth Corridor. And that was primarily based on the Indo-Pacific, you know, idea. So unfortunately, there was no international banking agencies were supporting that kind of idea, except ADB and except the Africa Development Bank. But we needed more international bank to come up and support that kind of idea. So Africa has been a part of the discussion on Indo-Pacific, but maybe not so much seriously in the multilateral level.
Yeah. I think they won't.
All right. It's already 6 o'clock, so I have to end this session. So you know, I'd like to thank all of you, of course, you know, not only the 5 excellent panelists, but all of you who participated in